Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, even more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, in Georgia, in Kansas, in Missouri, in Texas, Chicago, Illinois, in California, in New York, in Fiji Island, in Mexico, Spain, in Africa, Zambia, in Kenya, Pakistan, to the United Kingdom, and to our brethren in Australia, and also to our brethren in Malaysia, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our special episode, number 16, on the subject, the 66 books in the heavenly sanctuary. And in that 66 books, laid down by God, the plan of redemption. And we stated several times that the Bible is a replica of the books in heaven. So let's read again the statement in 1 TG number 10, page 18. The Bible contains the complete plan of salvation for all humanity. How do I know this? I know it because its story begins with creation and ends with the earth made new. Between the first and the last pages of the Bible, then lies the complete formula for man's salvation and redemption. So the Bible is the complete formula of the plan of redemption. So the statement in 2SR 187 saying, in the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. So we can't easily understand the particular object in view of the subject recorded in the Bible is Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, by which the plan of redemption had been carried out. That is the reason why the Spirit prophecy told us that on the great controversy 489, saying, the intercession of Christ in man's behalf in the sanctuary above is as essential to the plan of salvation as was his death upon the cross. By his death, he began that work, the work of the plan of redemption, which after his resurrection, he ascended to complete in heaven. So, the plan of redemption had been carried out, brothers and sisters, from crucifixion to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. And the work of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary, the focal point is the books. So here in tract number 3, page 6, and since the books are obviously the focal point in the scene. So what is the focal point in the judgment scene? The books. But since the focal point of Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary is cleansing the sanctuary and cleansing the books, brothers and sisters, there is only one book to be cleansed, and that is the Lamb's Book of Life. And that Lamb's Book of Life, not sealed with 7 seals, are divided into 7 divisions. And that is the reason why the Shepherd's Rod inscribed in plural form, Lamb's Books, tract number 3, page 7, that not every name that has been entered in the Lamb's Books will be retained there. So Lamb's Books, plural form, that not every name that had been entered into the pages of that Lamb's Books are to be forever retained there. There are names to be blotted out, and that's what it means by the word cleansing the books in the heavenly sanctuary. All other books, brothers and sisters, it will not be cleansed because the names who failed to obtain everlasting life will be inscribed into that book. Those books which is not called as the Lamb's books. So there are only 7 books to be cleansed in the heavenly sanctuary, by which it is called the Lamb's books of life. And accordingly, brothers and sisters, the judicial proceedings that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary, the particular object in view on earth are the saints that are destined for translation, those who will no longer to taste death, the last generation of men, you and I. We explained several times that the vision that was shown by God to Daniel as well as to John is the judgment. Tract number 15, page 13. Both seers distinctly declare that the event which they saw was the judgment. The difference between the two scenes is that Daniel was led to look into the sanctuary while preparations were being made for the judgment to convene, whereas John was led to look into the sanctuary after the judgment had been set up. In fact, John not only saw the judgment in progress, but he saw the whole proceeding from start to finish. So to understand the book of Revelation is to understand the whole proceedings that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary, because that's what the vision that was shown by God to John. The whole proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary from start to finish. And we repeated several times that the promise given in 2TG number 12, page 30, saying, the revelation, therefore, is to be more fully understood during the judgment of the living. So the book of Revelation will be more fully understood during the judgment of the living. And Betihotep died prior to that event. Therefore, it utters the impossibility of comprehending all the nature of the event, because the scripture is inscribed in present tense. Fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. And accordingly, since it is God who instructed John the Beloved to inscribe the occurrence in present tense, according to 1 SR 156 and 157, it says, therefore, God did not intend to make the judgment known until after the hour had come. For this reason, inspiration inscribed the occurrence in present tense is come in order to be grammatically correct. So that is the statement given by the voice of inspiration. Then the mere fact that the scripture was inscribed in present tense, plainly indicating that God had no intention whatsoever to make the judgment known prior to the event. And the prophet himself, Betihotep, says in Answerer number 1 on page 95, it says, so while it was not exactly understood beforehand what the nature of the event would be, so Betihotep made it so plain in that reading in Answerer number 1, page 95, that it was not exactly understood what the nature of the event. It's so because the scripture is inscribed in present tense. If God would reveal to Betihotep the entire proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, then it would be grammatically incorrect that he had been able to comprehend the nature of the event prior to its commencement. But the promise is very plain in 2TG number 12 on page 29. It says, the only difference you see is that Daniel was shown the judgment being set up, whereas John saw it in full session. The revelation, moreover, in the following verses, again and again, endeavors to make us see that the event there portrayed is the judgment in session. Fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. And I saw thrones, John declares, and judgment was given unto them. John truly penned it as a prophecy. But when it actually takes place, then God's agency on earth, the spirit of prophecy in the church, is to proclaim that the event has actually taken place. 2TG number 12, page 29. So the voice of inspiration is plainly telling you and I, brothers and sisters, that when the judgment for the living begins, God's agency on earth, the spirit of prophecy in the church, will be the one to proclaim it, that the event has actually taken place. Therefore, in that statement, we can immediately recognize that wherever that spirit of prophecy, wherever that prophetic gift is found, that is the church, God's agency on earth. The spirit of prophecy in the church will be the one to proclaim that the event has actually taken place, that the judgment for the living is in progress. And that's why the shepherd's rod declared clearly in 2SR page 220, saying, thus we conclude that when the seal is opened and the judgment for the living begins, we must know it. 2SR 220. Thus we conclude that when the seal is opened and the judgment for the living begins, we must know it. In what way? Through the spirit of prophecy in the church. God's agency on earth will be the one to proclaim that the event has actually taken place. And one of the most important things that we need to seriously, brothers and sisters, consider that concerning the knowledge of the commencement of the judgment for the living, the same category, how does the knowledge of the commencement of the judgment that pertains to the dead had been obtained? Now, let us read first Jezreel letter number 2 on page 2. So here in Jezreel letter number 2 on page 2, it says, now since the message of the judgment for the living is of far greater importance than the message of the judgment for the dead, it is but expected that the Bible will have more to say about the latter than the former. So the shepherd's rod is plainly telling that all the prophecies recorded in the Bible is directly pointing to the judgment that pertains to the living rather than to the dead. Then it says, this is so because the judgment for the living has to do with the living themselves, with the message bearers rather than with the dead. In importance, therefore, there is no comparison between the two. How will we get the message of the judgment for the living? The answer is clear to all. We will get it in the same way we got the one in 1844. Since it then came through inspiration and through God's own chosen instrumentality, it is certain that the additional message, early writings page 277, too, is to come in the same way. That is by inspiration through God's own chosen agency. Indeed, truth is never revealed in any other way but by inspiration. See 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 20. So the statement is very plain that if the knowledge concerning the commencement of the judgment of the dead, it was channeled by God through the prophetic gift, the gift of inspiration, in the medium of Sister White. The shepherd's rod plainly told us that in the same way also in the judgment that pertains to the living. Now, if in the judgment that pertains to the dead, God did not reveal it to William Miller, the complete understanding, the true nature of the event, due to the fact that the scripture is inscribed in present tense, the same in the judgment that pertains to the living. God would not reveal completely the entire proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary to Beti-Hotep at the time when such judgment that pertains to the living did not as yet actually commence in the days of Beti-Hotep. And that is why this is also one of the strongest proof to prove that if in the judgment that pertains to the dead, there are two inspired messengers, William Miller and Sister White. The same way, also in the judgment that pertains to the living, there must only two inspired divine messengers. Beti-Hotep, antitypical Elijah John the Baptist, and then the last messenger, antitypical Elijah the Tishbite. As a matter of fact, here in the General Conference is special. Let us read. On page 39, it says, in fact, the three angels' messages are applicable to the judgment for the dead only indirectly. For the judgment for the living is the all-important event. That is, the angel is not sent particularly to explain what the judgment does to the dead, but what it is to do to the living. Then it says, so we see that the more we consider the subject, the more obvious becomes the truth that the third angel's message in its final phase is the judgment for the living, the harvest. Plainly, then, the work of Elijah is to give light on the judgment for the living. And since the message of the judgment that pertains to the living is the last message, there is no more message to follow. Then, brothers and sisters, there must only two divine messengers. So, in this portion, completely overthrows such erroneous idea that after Beti-Hotep died, there are more than one divine inspired messenger that God would raise after Beti-Hotep. After Beti-Hotep, there is only one divine inspired messenger that ever predicted, recorded in the Shepherd's Rod publications, that God would raise, and that is antitypical Elijah the Tishbite. Both of them, the message that they proclaim is the judgment that pertains to the living, or the message that they proclaim is the great and dreadful day of the Lord. This is very important, brothers and sisters. Is there any other message to follow after Sister White rather than the great and dreadful day of the Lord? The only message that had been predicted that God would send to the world after the message was bestowed by God to Sister White, and that is the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And there will be no more message to follow after the great and dreadful day of the Lord, because plenty of evidences and proofs recorded in the Shepherd's Rod that the great and dreadful day of the Lord is the last message. And concerning the great and dreadful day of the Lord, here in the General Conference is special. On page 19, it says, to re-emphasize the fact, let it be said again, that being the last of the prophets, Elijah is, therefore, the only one who can open to our understanding all the prophecies of the Scriptures pertaining to the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The only one. So the statement here in the General Conference Special, page 19, the only one who can open our understanding concerning the subject, the great and dreadful day of the Lord, is antitypical Elijah. Brothers and sisters, apology, but I think, brothers and sisters, it is foolish enough to listen to any other voice except the voice of Elijah. In General Conference Special, page 8, it says, nevertheless, one's only safety will be in the teaching of Elijah, for there will be no other voice of timely truth and authority to whom one may turn. Any others will lead their victims blindfolded into perdition. The statement is very plain. The statement is very clear. Only the teaching of Elijah. What is the teaching of Elijah? The shepherd's rod publications. That is the only publications by which we can call the teaching of Elijah. So any other message, brothers and sisters, besides the shepherd's rod publications or any message that had been arose after the shepherd's rod publications had been completely written, it will lead only, brothers and sisters, blindfolded to perdition. That is the statement. There is no writings of B.T. Hotep called Bayesian Glad Tidings. Brothers and sisters, that writings are written by uninspired human being. It was not written by God's inspired servant. Any sources or basis of our doctrines which cannot be found in the teaching of Elijah, in the teaching of the shepherd's rod publications, it will only lead you blindfolded into perdition. That is the statement recorded in the General Conference Special on page 9. But still, we respect all others' belief, brothers and sisters. The only thing that I am saying is what I do fully believe. I do fully believe that the teaching of Elijah is the shepherd's rod publications. Micah 6 verse 9, hear ye the rod. The only rod that we need to hear is the writings of the shepherd's rod publications, written by God-inspired servant B.T. Hotep. And in my own understanding and belief, those writings, brothers and sisters, by which it was not written by B.T. Hotep, it cannot be a part of Micah 6:9. And that is why it is a blasphemy. For me, it is an outstanding blasphemy. Quoting Micah 7:14, saying, feed thy people with thy rod. If they were the very people mentioned in that Micah 7 verse 14, then they need to follow the absolute injunction that we need to feed God's people only by the message of the shepherd's rod. But they were feeding God's people many things not taken from the shepherd's rod. Brothers and sisters, they quoted Bayesian Glad Tidings or what writings, I could no longer remember, by which those writings that they feed God's people are not the rod. Brothers and sisters. So, the divine command is that we need to feed God's people only by the message of the shepherd's rod publications. Now, let us go back again to the reading in the General Conference Special on page 39 and page 40. Let us read again the statement. It says, so we see that the more we consider the subject, the more obvious becomes the truth that the third angel's message in its final phase is the judgment for the living, the harvest. Plainly then, the work of Elijah is to give light on the judgment for the living. General Conference Special, page 39 and 40. Who will give light concerning the judgment for the living? Antitypical Elijah. And that is the third angel's message in the judgment for the living. What is the particular object in view concerning the third angel's message? Now, I would like to read first 1 SR 186. It says, we call this message the third angel's message. 1 SR 186. We call this message the third angel's message, which is a combination of the first, the second, and the third angel's messages of Revelation 14, verse 6 to verse 12. The substance of the message we bear may be classified into 5 subjects. Number 1, the time of the end. Second, the judgment, the day of atonement since 1844. So, one of the message that constitute the third angel's message is the day of atonement, by which, on its primary phase, judgment for the dead commenced in October 22, 1844. So the statement that antitypical Elijah, he will be the one to explain the third angel's message in the judgment for the living, that must be pointing to the Day of Atonement on the judgment that pertains to the living. Now, brothers and sisters, since the judgment for the living is under the seventh seal, therefore that Day of Atonement is the last and final Day of Atonement. Let us distinctly separate the Day of Atonement, brothers and sisters, that pertains to the first seal, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth seal. So the seventh seal being the last seal, 2SR 202, I would like to read again the statement. 2SR page 202, it says, the seventh seal being the last, it must concern the living, but the seventh sealing period being the last must concern the living. So, to whom it may concern, the seventh seal, to whom it may concern, it is concern the saints that will no longer to taste death. And what is the statement in 2SR 220 concerning the seventh seal? Now let us read again the statement in 2SR 220. It says, thus we conclude that when the seal is open, what seal? The seventh seal. Brothers and sisters, the main subject here is the seventh seal. It says, thus we conclude that when the seal is opened and the judgment for the living begins, we must know it. So it is in absolute importance to know it. If we will not know, brothers and sisters, then what will happen? So it says here, thus we conclude that when the seal is opened and the judgment for the living begins, we must know it. The Day of Atonement, you see, the Day of Atonement in its type proves the same, for the Israelites were well informed of the event, their duty, and the consequence. How does ancient Israel had been informed? Well informed. Now, how much more in the antitypical Day of Atonement? Here in the great controversy on page 431, let's read the statement. It says, the great controversy on page 431. It says, how much more essential in this antitypical Day of Atonement that we understand the work of our high priest and know what duties are required of us. How much more essential, my dear brothers and sisters, that we need to know. As a matter of fact, it is even more intended to the living rather than to the dead. Here in 2SR page 220, I would like to read, it says, if God so faithfully revealed to the living, the commencement of the judgment for the dead, it cannot be possible that He would keep secret the time of the judgment for the living. If He did, we would have no present truth in the time of the last seal. Neither could there be justice in such secrecy, nor could such judgment be legal. That statement is very plain, brothers and sisters, that there is no reason for God to keep it secret to the people by which they need to know that their cases are on trial. That is the statement in 2TG number 12 on page 30. It says, to the people who must know that their cases are on trial. Who are they? The saints that will no longer to taste death. They need to know that their cases are on trial, brothers and sisters. And that is why B.D. Hanum says in 2TG number 11 on page 13, I would like to read the statement. It says, other truths, even more important, must be introduced for the harvest of the living. 2TG number 11, page 13. Other truths, even more important, must be introduced for the judgment of the living. I say more important truths because they are concerning the living themselves, concerning you and I. Brothers and sisters, it says, concerning those whose own cases are to be weighed in the balances, in the heavenly sanctuary, those who personally are to be judged either as sweet or as tares, either as good fish or as bad fish. In what way? To determine, brothers and sisters, if we will be good fish or bad fish. In what way that we will be determined whether we will be wheat or we will be tares? In what way, my dear brothers and sisters? Through the judicial proceedings that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary, which is the first aspect of the judgment, which is only bookwork. Now let me read to you again the statement in answerer number 5 on page 30. It says, this is the first aspect of the judgment, and being only a bookwork, Daniel 7 verse 10, a work that does not disturb either the dead in the graves or the living in the church, it takes place in heaven. In what way does the bookwork transaction is taking place in the heavenly sanctuary? Let us read the upper paragraph, or let us read the upper sentences. Let's read the statement. It says, still answerer number 5, page 30. It says, and as the congregation of the dead, as well as the congregation of the living, are commingled with the good and the bad. Remember the statement in the last sentence, that is bookwork. So, for example, this is the book pertains to the living, the 7th seal. The last book to be cleansed, and the time by which such book are still a mixed multitude, commingled the names of the wicked and the names of the righteous. And that is the time by which it is up to us. Our own works decide our eternal destiny. Brothers and sisters, the statement on, I would like to read again, 2SR page 198. It says, our attitude towards present truth. Let's read 2SR 198. Our attitude towards present truth would either make a tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt. For the tree is known by his fruit. So, we can paraphrase the statement by saying, our attitude towards present truth would either make us wheat or would either make us tares. Our attitude towards present truth would either make us bad fish or whether make us as good fish. Life is but what we make it, brothers and sisters. The shepherd's rod plainly told us here in 1 TG number 50, page 15, life is but what we make it. 1 TG number 50, page 15, life is but what we make it. That is the title of this reading material. It says, but all perish as fools only because they had failed to give heed to present truth, had failed to feed on meat in due season. What folly, what disaster. Why is it that they perish as fools? Because of rejecting present truth. Our attitude towards present truth is what decides our eternal destiny. And as far as the word it is written is thus concerned, brothers and sisters, the only present truth that ever recorded in the golden bowl is the third angel's message. And if you will be saying third angel's message, that is the first, second, and third, comprises the threefold messages. All other messages that follow give only power and force to the third angel's message. Because in volume 5, page 206 and 207, it says, the third angel is the last message. And I would like to read to you Testimonies for the Church, volume 8, and also volume 6. It says here, Testimonies for the Church, volume 8 and volume 6. It says here in volume 8, page 194. Artificial lights may appear, claiming to come from heaven, but they cannot shine forth as the star of holiness, the star of heavenly brightness, to guide the feet of the pilgrim and stranger into the city of God. False lights will take the place of the true, and many souls will be for a time deceived. God forbid that it should be so with us. The true light now shineth, and will light up the souls in which the windows are opened heavenward. So the true light is, brothers and sisters, leads to the windows heavenward. And what is that true light? Here in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 8, page 10, it says, the true light is to shine forth, for darkness covers the earth, and gross darkness the people. What is the true light? Volume 6, page 17. It says, the light we have received upon the third angel's message is the true light. Volume 6, page 17. The light we have received upon the third angel's message is the true light. So the true light must be the message that constitutes the third angel's message. And what is the statement in the Great Controversy 435 concerning the message of the third angel? It is pointing to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. Brothers and sisters, let us read the statement here in the Great Controversy 435. Those who had accepted the light concerning the mediation of Christ and the perpetuity of the law of God found that these were the truths presented in Revelation 14. The messages of this chapter constitutes a threefold warning, which is to prepare the inhabitants of the earth for the Lord's second coming. The announcement, the hour of His judgment is come, points to the closing work of Christ's ministration for the salvation of men. It heralds a truth which must be proclaimed until the Savior's intercession shall cease and He shall return to the earth to take His people to Himself. The work of judgment which began in 1844 must continue until the cases of all are decided, both of the living and the dead. The Great Controversy, page 435. So, the statement is very plain. What is the message of the third angel? Directly pointing heavenward to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, by which the shepherd's rod explained that is purely bookwork transaction. The first aspect of the judgment, my dear brothers and sisters. I would like to remind again and again that according to White House Recruiter, on page 39, let's read again, it says that the message of the third angel will not swell into a loud cry, not until all the aspects of the judgment will be completely revealed. It says here, White House Recruiter, page 39, but in what way is it to give absolute power and force to them? White House Recruiter, page 39. But in what way is it to give absolute power and force to them? First, by bringing to light the heretofore unrevealed aspects of the judgment. By bringing to light the heretofore unrevealed aspects of the judgment. And the first aspect of the judgment is bookwork transaction. And that heaven's books deal with all aspects of life. White House Recruiter, page 20. That heaven's books deal with all aspects of life. Now, let us read again the statement here in Answerer number 5, page 30. It says, this is the first aspect of the judgment. And being only a bookwork, Daniel 7, verse 10, a work that does not disturb either the dead in the graves or the living in the church, it takes place in heaven. And you know, when we proclaim this message, profess, obedient, ridiculed, mocked, and laughing with this proclamation. It seems that the statement is not in reality. They say that, you see, there is nothing happen on earth. Look at these foolish teachers, false prophets saying that there is nothing occurred on the earth. While the statement we proclaim is not ours. It was taken in the shepherd's rod. Brothers and sisters, we will guarantee to you 100%. We never preach anything by which it was not written in the golden bowl, more particularly in the shepherd's rod publications. Now, I would like to read again the statement here on Answerer number 5, page 30. It says, this is the first aspect of the judgment, and being only a bookwork, Daniel 7, verse 10, a work that does not disturb either the dead in the graves or the living in the church, it takes place in heaven. What is that bookwork transaction? Let us read the upper sentence. And as the congregation of the dead, as well as the congregation of the living, are commingled with the good and the bad, the judgment takes place among both. first among the dead, then among the living. And this is the very message that we are honestly and seriously, brothers and sisters, considering the nearness of time. First of all, brethren, of all the subject ever recorded in the Bible, it was guaranteed by God in Revelation chapter 5. No man in heaven, neither any angels, nor on earth, nor the devil, nor the fallen angels could be able to explain the sanctuary doctrine. Or in other words, the bottom line is, God completely disarmed the devil concerning the sanctuary doctrine, by which he failed to counterfeit such doctrine. Because if the devil is allowed to counterfeit, brothers and sisters, this statement would no longer be in reality. I would like to read again the statement in 2SR 133. It says, "This unquestionable evidence proves that the movement that arose in 1844 is God's true church and divinely predicted. Hence, it clears up the widespread confusion in Christendom as to which denomination has the truth for the present time. It also weeds out all the rest as false, for it is the only movement that has the truth of the sanctuary." The only movement, meaning there is no other movement. That declaration plainly indicating that the devil had not been allowed by God to counterfeit the sanctuary doctrine. Because if the sanctuary doctrine had been counterfeited by the devil, then you cannot declare that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the only movement by which has the sanctuary doctrine. And that's why here in TAC number 2, page 34, let us read again the statement. It says, "Amidst the multi-sectarian confusion overspreading all Christendom, at the present time, it may seem difficult to segregate the Laodiceans from among the rest, but the great designer of types and symbols, the one who seeing the end from the beginning, does foresaw precisely what was to be the condition and the work of the last of the seven churches, must therefore, by his word, be able to pick this church from among the multitude of churches, and set it like a beacon, shining forth in the darkest hour of the night." Track number 5, page 34. Now, if the sanctuary doctrine in the judgment that pertains to the dead never been counterfeited any other, brothers and sisters, that God never allowed the devil to counterfeit it, how much more in the judgment for the living? By which it is even more important. For example, in the judgment for that pertains to the dead, when Sister White says, October 22, 1844, the commencement of the judgment of the dead. If there is another movement, we'll say, the commencement of the judgment of the dead in the heavenly sanctuary, it must be in October 22, 1846. And some will say 1847. Then it would cause confusion. And not only cause confusion, the declaration, the divine decree in Revelation chapter 5 had been broken. But the fact is, it was tested and proven. From 1844 up to this present time, there is no Sabbath keeper. There is no movement, professed Sabbath keepers, by which, in spite of the fact that they don't believe, Sister White, they have a sanctuary doctrine. No, absolutely, they have no sanctuary doctrine. Because there is a divine declaration. Then how much more in the judgment that pertains to the living? And that is why I'm trying to repeat it again and again, brothers and sisters, to save oneself from such unpardonable sin. Because if you'll be saying that we obtain this knowledge through the spirit of the devil, then, to repeat again, it is tantamount to declare that Jesus Christ is telling a lie. He is not telling the absolute fact, the absolute truth, by which there is a divine code that nobody could open it, nobody could close it concerning the proceedings that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary. Only the lion in the tribe of Judah, which is Jesus Christ, could explain it. So that is the strongest proof ever recorded in the Jefferson saying in 2TG 24:16. 2TG 24, page 16. I would like to read again the statement. It says that, "Are not these tests strong enough to convince any of you that the secret things of God, such as the cancelled prophecies, are not disclosed by finite men. No, not by the devil either. That when God wants a thing to be a secret, it remains cancelled until He Himself reveals it. Then when it is revealed, all are to know that God Himself is at work. 2 TG 24 on page 16. And that is the promise in 2 TG 12:29. That when the judgment for the living is actually taking place, then God's agency on earth, the spirit of prophecy in the church, will be the one to proclaim that the event has actually taken place. 2 TG number 12 on page 29. Brothers and sisters, when God said it, that would be the absolute reality. Brothers and sisters, that if in the judgment that pertains to the dead, Jesus Christ do not allow Satan to make a false proclamation to brought confusion by saying that the investigative judgment of the dead commenced in 1846, or it might be the investigative judgment of the dead commenced in 1849, or it might be 1850, or earlier than that. Never been happened. Why? Because there is a divine decree cometh from the mouth of the living God. No man in heaven, neither any angels, nor on earth, brothers and sisters, could be able to do such thing. Only the Lion in the tribe of Judah. Only the Spirit of Christ can do such thing. Now let us now go back to our subject. Our subject is concerning the Day of Atonement, which concerns the living. I would like to read answerer number 1. So let's read answerer number 1 on page 94. Answerer number 1, page 94. It says, in the statement in question, the rod has no reference to the investigative judgment. So the rod has no reference to the investigative judgment. The message sets no date, either exact or approximate. What message? The message in the days of Bethel. It says, never sets date concerning the close of the judgment of the dead. It says, the message sets no date, either exact or approximate, for the closing of the judgment of the dead or for the beginning of the judgment of the living. This declaration given by the prophet, it was written in 1944. This declaration given by Bethel is clear enough that he has no knowledge when the judgment of the dead will close and when the judgment for the living begins. Either exact or approximate, Bethel has no knowledge at all. But it was misconstrued by many Davidian, saying that the message sets no date. Why is it that you set date of the commencement of the judgment for the living, while the shepherd's rod sets no date? Brothers and sisters, you need to read the entire shepherd's rod publication. In answerer number 3, page 41, it says that the inviolable rule of interpretation is that we need to harmonize all other related inspired statements. This reading, Bethel is only testifying that he has no knowledge. The message that was bestowed by God unto him, God never told him when the judgment for the dead will close and the judgment for the living begins. Either exact or either approximate. But the question is, does the shepherd's rod teach us that we will never know? The only reason that Bethel did not know because the scripture is inscribed in present tense. If God would reveal it to Bethel, then such revelation would be grammatically incorrect. Now let us continue reading the statement in answerer number 1, page 94 and 95. The message sets no date, either exact or approximate, for the closing of the judgment of the dead or for the beginning of the judgment of the living. The time of the cessation of the one event and the beginning of the other is not to be known until the one is past and the other begun. So it will be known. When? When it will be known? When the one is past and the other begun. What is the one which is past? The judgment that pertains to the dead. So the statement, the one is past, is the same to declare the judgment for the dead close and then the judgment for the living commence. That is the statement in 2SR 164. Let us read 2SR 164. It says, 2SR page 164. But when our high priest, that is Jesus Christ, but when our high priest shall begin the atonement for the living, atonement for what? For the living. 2SR 164. But when our high priest shall begin the atonement for the living, there must be a message of present truth, sounding of the trumpet, urging everyone to lay hold on the Lamb of God, which is Jesus Christ, by which only can he in figure come to the sanctuary, confess his sin, and secure his life. Unless the close of the judgment for the dead, the close of the judgment for the dead. The term close of the judgment for the dead, the judgment for the dead is finished. The judgment for the dead is past. And it says, unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to us, we would have no present truth, while the judgment for the living is in session. You see, brothers and sisters, we would have no present truth. Present truth to what? Present truth under the judgment for the living. Present truth under the seventh seal. Because the saints of God are sealed with present truth in all ages. 1SR page 28, it says, according to these scriptures, which are plainly stated, we must conclude that the saints of God are sealed with present truth in all ages. And whatever that present truth is, that is the seal. And the seventh sealing period is concerned the living. It says, but the seventh sealing period, 2SR 202, it says, but the seventh sealing period, being the last, must concern the living. There must be present truth under the judgment that pertains to the living. And one of the message that constitute that present truth is the knowledge when the judgment for the dead close and the judgment for the living begins. Because if we will not know when the judgment for the living begins and God begins the proceedings to the living by which the living themselves had no knowledge at all, then such judgment would be illegal. The statement in Un-Adventist Activities Research Committee on page 15, it says, and how will he judge the living? And how will we judge? And how will he, God the Father, and how will he judge the living without a message declaring that their cases are now to appear before God? Then it says, would the judge of heaven condemn one without trial? And how shall he judge him without summons? And this is the very message that you are listening. Every now and then, this is the heavenly summons announcing the approaching Day of Atonement, which is blotting out of names. The statement is very clear in 2SR 164. He who fails to respond to the heavenly summons will be left without the seal or covering of God. Therefore, they must be cut off as prefigured on the antitypical Day of Atonement or the typical Day of Atonement. The word cut off meaning their names will be blotted out. Would you think this message is of the devil? To warn the people to prepare themselves so that their names will never be erased, so that their names will never be blotted out? Is there any prediction in the shepherd's rod that the devil will make a false declaration concerning the sanctuary doctrine? Is there any prediction in the shepherd's rod or in the writings of Sister White that such sanctuary doctrine will be counterfeited by the devil? There is no such thing, brethren. What the devil did, trodden underfoot, he did not counterfeit, but trodden underfoot. What is the statement given in track number 4, page 26? It says, note that the truth, track number 4, page 26. Note that the truth and the place, not the sanctuary itself, were cast down. That is, both Christ's truth and his place in the earthly sanctuary were set aside. What is the work of the exceeding great horn, the devil? To set aside the subject of the sanctuary doctrine. Because the devil will not counterfeit it. Because if the devil will counterfeit it, then the minds of the people will be enlightened. Oh, so we need to study closely the sanctuary doctrine. But that is not the work of the devil. The work of the devil is to set aside. It says here, and then it says, so that the knowledge as to his mediatorial work became obscured. What does it mean by obscured? Darkened. We need to study the Bible. What is the prediction given in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation concerning the work of Satan, concerning the sanctuary doctrine? He never counterfeits, but rather, brothers and sisters, he is trying to the utmost of his ability that if possible, the people would be in total darkness concerning the sanctuary doctrine. And that is plainly stated in White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32. Let us read. White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32. Let us not, however, forget that there is an enemy who is determined to keep God's people in darkness, in ignorance of timely truth. And what more damaging darkness could he seek to keep them in than in ignorance of that which God would have them to know, while their judgment is pending, while they are being weighed in the balances of the sanctuary? None, absolutely none. Or in other words, this statement can be easily understood that when God will send the heavenly summons through the channel of the prophetic gift, the spirit of prophecy in the church, the devil will try to the utmost of his ability that if possible, God's people will not listen to it. God's people will set it aside. God's people will take it for granted until Christ's mediatorial work, until that final day of atonement will be ended. And of course, brothers and sisters, if a person's judgment is pending in the heavenly sanctuary and he is unaware of the fact, track number 3, page 54. This is the statement. For when a person's judgment is pending in the heavenly sanctuary, and he is unaware of the fact, he will be unprepared and unable to stand when his case is investigated. Track number 3 on page 54. So the message is very urgent. 1 TG number 3, page 15, thus urging Judah, the church, to keep this antitypical atonement feast. 1 TG number 3, page 15. Thus urging Judah, the church, to keep this antitypical atonement feast. What is the message of Nahum? Keep thy solemn feast. There is no other solemn feast except the holy feast. Let me read to you, brothers and sisters. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2. Let's read 500. Let's read the statement. Oh, I forgot the statement. Here in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, 573, it says, God gave direction to the Israelites to assemble before Him at set periods in the place which He should choose and observe special days wherein no unnecessary work was to be done. But the time was to be devoted to a consideration of the blessings which He had bestowed upon them. In 574, it says, God requires no less of His people in these last days in sacrifices and offerings than He did of the Jewish nation. But I'm looking to the statement where Sister White quoted, brothers and sisters, the solemn feast as the holy feast. There is no other solemn feast ever recorded in the Bible except, brethren, I would like to read here in Patriarchs and Prophets 537. There were 3 annual assemblies of all Israel for worship at the sanctuary. Shiloh was for a time the place of these gatherings, but Jerusalem afterward became the center of the nation's worship. And here the tribes convened for the solemn feast. You see, brothers and sisters, what is that 3 annual assemblies? Let's read Answerer number 3. Answerer number 3 on page 11. It says, the Passover, it says, and so it is the Passover, the Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, the 3 most important feasts in the year. And what is the statement in Patriarchs and Prophets 537? These 3, Passover, Day of Atonement, and Feast of Tabernacles, solemn feast. Keep thy solemn feast. Brothers and sisters, these three feasts is prophetic, typological. Day of Atonement, blotting out of names. Passover week, pointing to antitypical Israel. Brothers and sisters, went out of Egypt. Feast of Tabernacles. That is the time that God's people leaving the cities and the villages. Three most important feasts. The Day of Atonement is in the heavenly sanctuary. Passover and Feast of Tabernacles, the occurrence is on the earthly sanctuary. But of course, we need to focus first to the occurrence in the heavenly sanctuary, the Day of Atonement. This statement, I would like to read again, brethren, the Great Controversy 490. It says, all, the Great Controversy 490, all who would have their names retained in the book of life should now, in the few remaining days of their provision, afflict their souls before God by sorrow for sin and true repentance, instead of spending the time angling for such claim that they are the true headquarters. Brethren, in reality, the devil successfully trodden underfoot the daily and the sanctuary. What does it mean by trodden underfoot? Set aside. Matthew 5:13. Become good for nothing. Trodden underfoot. It seems good for nothing. It seems that the subject of the daily and the sanctuary has no importance at all. Supposed to be what we need to do is to help each other. We need to share each other. What we understand, the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. And even this statement, they mock us. They ridicule us. They laugh. When we read this statement in 4 BC 11:39 saying, they are privileged to see by faith that is going forward in the heavenly sanctuary. How could you understand that these are the very people that they have been given the privilege to see by faith what is going on in the heavenly sanctuary? It will be revealed into their lives. I would like to read the description. It says, the statement given in the spirit of prophecy. 4 BC 11:39. Isaiah had denounced the sin of others, but now he sees himself exposed to the same condemnation he had pronounced upon them. And that is why I would like to cite an example. For example, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, by which we consider as a harlot. Now let us consider the occurrence in the days of Jesus Christ. What is the declaration given by Jesus Christ here in John chapter 8? I would like to read. John chapter 8, it says, let us read. I would like to go to verse 3. John chapter 8, verse 3. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. So quote in the act, the evidence is very clear that this woman was taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Now, I quote this occurrence, brothers and sisters, because in my own experience, from 1987, every Sabbath, every other day, we go to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, sighing and crying, brothers and sisters, all the abominations that be done in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and we declare that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a woman, which is a harlot. Now, granting that that woman is the woman in John chapter 8, then Jesus Christ will tell us, He who without sin among you will be the one to first cast a stone to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, I would like to read here 4 BC 11:39. It says, Isaiah had denounced the sin of others, but now he sees himself exposed to the same condemnation he had pronounced upon them. He had been satisfied with a cold, lifeless ceremony in his worship of God. He had not known this until the vision was given him of the Lord. How little now appeared his wisdom and talents as he looked upon the sacredness and majesty of the sanctuary. How unworthy he was,
how unfitted for sacred service in view of himself might be expressed in the language of the Apostle Paul, O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? And then it says on the next paragraph, Isaiah had a wonderful view of God's glory. He saw the manifestation of God's power, and after beholding His majesty, a message came to him to go and do a certain work. He felt wholly unworthy for the work. What made him esteem himself unworthy? Did he think himself unworthy before he had a view of God's glory? No, he imagined himself in a righteous state before God. But when the glory of the Lord of hosts was revealed to him, when he beheld the inexpressible mystery, majesty of God, he said, I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And then it says, brothers and sisters, in 4 BC 11:38, Isaiah's experience represents the last day church. Brethren, that would be the experience of the 144,000 living saints. Those will be among that special company, you and I. Yes, all the 144,000 living saints experience sighing and crying in the mother church. But it was already laid down in the prophetic vision in the book of Isaiah that after we have been given the privilege to see by faith what is going on in the heavenly sanctuary, brothers and sisters, we feel the same condemnation that if we will continue crying to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, while in reality not knowing that we of ourselves, brothers and sisters, is not worthy. But those who have no knowledge concerning the sanctuary doctrine, the heavenly sanctuary, they continually, brothers and sisters, stand on such attitude, thinking that they were worthy, crying to the whole world, we are the true headquarters. Think it holy, my dear brothers and sisters. I would like to read this reading in 1 TG number 27. 1 TG number 27, page 6. Micah 6, verse 6 and 7. 1 TG number 27, page 6 and 7. And it is also Micah verses 6 and 7. It says, wherewith shall I come before the Lord, and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before Him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000 of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Then this is the commentary given by the Shepherd's Club. From these verses, it is apparent that the unfoldment of these scriptures brings a revival and reformation among God's people, such as the world has never seen. So this is pointing to the predicted final effort of revival and reformation. So Micah 6, verse 6 and 7 is a prophecy. And it is a prophecy concerning the predicted revival and reformation. Let me read to you in 1 TG 41, page 28 and page 29. I do fully believe that this prophecy of Isaiah in Isaiah 61 verse 10 is the same with Micah 6 verse 6 and 7. Let's read 1 TG 41 page 28 and 29. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in my God. For He hath clothed me with the garments of salvation. He hath covered me with the robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decketh himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorneth herself with her jewels. Then it says, this chapter of Isaiah the prophet is indeed to bring revival and reformation such as has never taken place since the beginning of sin. God forbid that any one of us should miss the experience and the blessings that come through this revival and reformation. To repeat again, I do fully believe that the revival and reformation recorded in Isaiah 61 verse 10, as stated in 1 TG 41, page 28 and 29, is the same revival and reformation predicted in Micah 6, verses 6 and verse 7. Now let us go back again to the statement in 1 TG number 27, pages 6 and page 7. From these verses, it is apparent that the unfoldment of these scriptures brings a revival and reformation among God's people, such as the world has never seen. the description in 1TJ 41, page 29, it says, revival and reformation, such has never taken place since the beginning of sin. Synonymous to the statement, brings a revival and reformation among God's people, such as the world has never seen. Then it says here in 1TJ 27, page 6, those who receive the truth in its fullness, the word fullness meaning whole truth, fullness, that is pertaining to the whole truth concerning the plan of redemption. I would like to read to you first here in 2SR 139. 2SR page 139. The Bible is the revelation of creation and redemption in Christ, Creator and Redeemer. 2SR 139. The Bible is the revelation of creation and redemption in Christ, Creator and Redeemer. Therefore, the Sabbath and the sanctuary constitute the truth. The truth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The Sabbath and the sanctuary constitute the truth. See Hebrews chapter 9 verse 10 and Hebrews chapter 4 verse 4 and 10. Thus these two doctrines are coupled together, cannot be separated, and bear the whole truth. The daily and the sanctuary, that doctrines are coupled together. No, it cannot be separated and still bear the whole truth. Brothers and sisters, whatever our understanding, whatever our doctrine, whatever our message, if it is separated from the sanctuary truth, from the heavenly sanctuary truth, from the proceedings of Jesus Christ in the heavenly sanctuary, that is not the whole truth. That is not the plan of redemption. So hear the statement here in 1TJ 27, page 6. Those who receive the truth in its fullness humbly confess that they are sinners. Or in other words, they have nothing to boast about. Brothers and sisters, the true people of God who have acknowledged in the sanctuary doctrine, they will always consider other people better than themselves. That is the very statement given in answerer number 4. They think others better than themselves. I would like to read the statement. Answerer number 4, page 66 and 67. To defeat the enemy and maintain unity and harmony, let every believer cease finding fault with his brethren. Watch his own steps and not theirs. Realize that they have the same opportunity as does he to know the difference between right and wrong. Bear his own and not their responsibility. Esteem them better than himself, and do and say nothing he would not like them to do or say to him. So the true people of God, they will always esteem other better than himself. The true people of God, those who have a knowledge of the sanctuary doctrine, they will not boast themselves. It says here in 1TJ 27, page 6, those who receive the truth in its fullness humbly confess that they are sinners and that they wish to know the worst of their case. So we need to know the worst of our case. We need to know, brothers and sisters, what God designs us to do in order that our names will not be blotted out. They gladly sacrifice anything and everything. To them, no sacrifice is too great that would bring them closer to the Lord. So as long as that sacrifice is to bring them closer to the Lord, they give it everything, anything. And there is no sacrifice too great in order for us to bring closer to our Lord, Jesus Christ. Now let us go back again, brethren. I remember the statement on track number 6. Here in track number 6 on page, it says here, on page 42. Track number 6, page 42. Be in the class of the 5 wise virgins. So it is an admonition that whatever the description given in the Bible as explained by the shepherd's rod concerning the wise virgins, the 5 wise virgins, apply it in our lives. Be in the class of the 5 wise virgins, my brethren, and avail yourselves of this extra oil. Now before your lamps go out and the door closes forever. Matthew 25 verse 10. Anoint thine eyes with eye salve that thou mayest see. Revelation 3 verse 18. What is the eye salve? Or what is the salve? For example, if you will read track number 5 on page 14. Track number 5, page 14, it says, such will never recover from their terrible blindness. Track number 5, page 14. Such will never recover from their terrible blindness until they begin to search for the eye-salve inspiration. As they do for gold, for only new truth can open their eyes and mask their errors and woo them to the truth. Woo meaning W-O-O, to be drawn more love to the truth. Only new truth. What is the new truth? Present truth. The new truth is present truth. It says, track number 3, page 9. Always man's greatest test and one which has ever involved almost an instantaneous decision has been in the unrolling of the scroll, the eclipse of a past message by a new one, present truth. What is the new one? Present truth. Of course, the word present truth, present revelation. It could not be the revelation from 1930 to 1955. That is no longer present truth. Although we need it. All the truths in the past, we need it. The same with the statement on the old symbolic code. It says here, one symbolic code, number 5, page 8. One symbolic code, number 5, page 8. It says, there is the past message and the fresh message. God does not want any man to think that no other message is to be heard but that which he may have given. We want the past message. We want the past message and the fresh message. So the past message and the fresh message, we need them both. And it says in 11 symbolic code number 3 on page 5, it says, there is a special blessing promised to those whom he finds giving meat in due season. But what was meat in due season in 1844 most likely would not meet in due season in 1944. If we do not desire meat in due season, however, he does not give it to us. So the meat in due season in 1930 to 1955, then for sure, could not be the meat in due season in this year 2021. Now let us read track number 6, page 42. Be in the class of the 5 wise virgins, my brethren, and avail yourselves of this extra oil. Now before your lamps go out and the door closes forever. Matthew 25 verse 10. Anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. Revelation 3 verse 18. Sigh and cry for the abominations that be done in the church. Ezekiel 9 verse 4. So we did experience sighing and crying in the mother church, all of us. So our experience had been laid down already in the Bible as explained by the spirit of prophecy. And then it says, sigh and cry for the abominations that be done in the church, Ezekiel 9 verse 4, that you may prove yourself worthy to carry the message to her. What time by which Isaiah proved worthy to carry the message? After he had a full view of the sanctuary in heaven, according to 4 BC 11:38 and 11:39. Then it says, that you may prove yourself worthy to carry the message to her. Then after you have cried out, so it is the time now, brothers and sisters, because we passed that period of time, sighing and crying in the mother church, then this is the time by which this statement must be applied. Then after you have cried out, O Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off. Nahum 1 verse 15. Last part. It shall be said of you, behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace. In track number 14, page 23, it says, page 22. Track number 14, page 22. Therefore, only as they awake, let us distinctly separate, brothers and sisters, Isaiah 52, verse 1 and 2, because that prophecy is addressed to the 10 tribes, or directly addressed, brothers and sisters. But the Lord's arm, we as shepherds rod believer, the message that was given unto us is Isaiah 51, verse 9. What is Isaiah 51, verse 9? Let us read 1 TG. 1 TG number 37. Let's read on page 15, page 14 and 15. What is the Lord's arm that judges the people? 1 TG 37, page 14 and 15. What is the Lord's arm that judges the people? This we shall see as we read. Isaiah 51 verse 9, Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient of days, in the generation of old. Art thou not it that hath cut Rahab and wounded the dragon? Art thou not it which hath dried the sea, the waters of the great deep, that hath made the deeps of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over? Then it says, how illogical it would be for God to be trying to awake himself as do he, or his own arm is asleep. This verse shows that he calls the Exodus movement his arm. Rightly so, because God does his work with his servants. His servants therefore are his arm, and they shall judge, rule the people, and the people shall trust on them. 1 TG 37, page 14 and 15. So the message that directly addressed to the shepherds and believers in reality is Isaiah 51 verse 9, not Isaiah 52 verse 1 and 2. Now I would like to read here track number 14, page 22. Therefore only as they awake and give heed to the voice of the true witness and turn their steps toward the gates of the kingdom, may they ever hope to participate in the divine eventuality, hoping that we are among who will participate this coming Day of Atonement. O Judah, keep thy solemn feast. Perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off. I would like to apply the statement in reality. Oh, candidates to be among the living saints, 144,000. Keep thy solemn feast. What feast? First, the Day of Atonement, 1 TG 3:15. Thus urging Judah to keep this antitypical atonement feast. Why we need to keep the antitypical atonement feast? So that we will be worthy of escaping God's vengeance. Only those who will participate this divine eventuality. I would like to read 1 TG number 3, page 15. Thus urging Judah, the church, to keep this antitypical atonement, the Day of Atonement, antitypical atonement feast, and to perform her vows to God, so as to be found worthy of escaping the judgment of God. In order for us to be found worthy to escape the judgments of God. And it says, may they ever hope, track 14, page 22, may they ever hope to participate in the divine eventuality. O Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off. In the actual application, it must be, brothers and sisters, may they ever hope to participate in this antitypical Day of Atonement, by which only those who will participate, their names will be retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. Keep this antitypical atonement feast, for after that antitypical Day of Atonement, the final Day of Atonement, blotting out of names, there will be no more wicked to be inscribed into that book. The wicked is utterly cut off. The wicked, the names of the wicked is completely blotted out. Brothers and sisters, we need to face the reality. This message was not bestowed unto us because we are more righteous. No. As a matter of fact, we are unworthy. The only reason that this message is revealed is to prepare all of us on that coming antitypical Day of Atonement, blotting out of names, so that our names will never be blotted out, that our names will be forever retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. Having this knowledge that had been bestowed by God unto us, entrusted unto us, is not a guarantee that our names will not be blotted out. Brothers and sisters, our standing is the same with all others. Even though the message was channeled unto us, if we will not be faithful, the possibility is still there that our names will be blotted out. So I would like to repeat again. Being entrusted with this revelation, with this message, the entire proceedings that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary is not a guarantee that our names will be forever retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. That even though this knowledge was entrusted to us to proclaim the message, to prepare God's people, if we ourselves will be unfaithful, there is no corresponding works in our lives, still the possibility of being blotted out is still always there. Brothers and sisters, concerning the plan of redemption, those that had been channeled by such revelation from God and those by which such revelation was not channeled to them had the same standing before God. faithfulness to the message, and obedience to the message and requirements is what brings life eternal. Thank you very much, brethren, for listening and viewing this program. We love you, hoping that all of us, our names will be forever retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. All Shepherd's Rod believers, that would be my prayer. And hoping that all of us will see in God's kingdom happily. Hoping that all Bayesian movement will be in God's kingdom. Hoping that all Gilead, Waco, Mountain Dale, Salem, Webship Ministry, and all others, Seventh-day Adventist Church, all Christians, if possible, we would be in God's kingdom and gloriously and happily enjoying the gift of salvation bestowed by God to all who will be victorious on that day. Thank you very much. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful, wonderful evening.